Nick, I'm gonna give it over to you now.
All right, I will be doing a live demonstration of a feature that was added in Haiku 6.1 that brings the uh, Bulkrax settings into the Haiku app itself. And what that enables is repository administrators to set their Bulkrax import and default export settings within their own tenant without developer intervention. So I'll walk through how to locate that, how to use that, and then some of the limitations that that has, and then some of the interactions that that will have with a forthcoming uh, update that will bring in flexible metadata because they are interoperable, but there are some things to know about how they interact. So when you're on the homepage of your repository, navigate to your dashboard. You'll be able to access this if you have admin status, but not otherwise. And it's located under the configuration section, under settings, in your account settings. There are configuration options in Haiku to bracket out some elements of the account editing for some that only super admins would be able to access, even in this tenant setting, and some that the local admins would be able to access. So if you navigate here, you're on 6.1 and you don't see this, then possibly that's a design configuration that has been restricted. But by default, local admin, the admin in a repository will have the that's doubled up, will have this Bulkrax mapping section on their account settings page. And so you can see it's an embedded little code editor in the settings page here. And so you'll sometimes run into this even just as you're navigating the page. If you're using your scroll wheel to scroll up and down, if you're hovering over this section, then you're moving within this section and not the page. And sometimes the transition between those is not super smooth. So like right now I'm scrolling my wheel, I'm not getting any response, and that's just because it my mouse has detected I'm no longer over the page, but it has not yet picked up that I'm within the mapping section. And so that's just something that you'll notice as you're navigating the page itself if you're trying to use the scroll wheel. A couple of other things to note about just navigating here. If you do a Control F search on this page, it will not search this embedded code editor. So if you're looking for a term that is in your code editor, a Control F search will not find it. And you might actually find it beneficial to take the entire string. You can, if you click on it, Control A will highlight all, and Control C will copy. So you can copy, move into a local code editor, then do your Control F search. So you want to look for everything that's labeled a true value. You can go through, identify all of those there, and then you can highlight, either you can make all of your changes here, paste it back in, or use this as a sort of reference, go back and make your changes here. Changes in here are not reflected until you go to the bottom of the page and click Save Changes. So you can feel free to make changes and sort of treat this as draft until you make a save. Um, so that's how the editor is located within your settings. Now, as for what you can do with this, it's really important to keep in mind, this is making changes to Bulkrax Field Mappings. It's making changes that are relevant for when you're using your importer that uses the Bulkrax software or sort of as a module that's installed in your app. It is not actually making changes to your repository system. So if you add fields here, then that would add acceptable columns in a CSV that you would import. It will not add those as metadata fields to your work types. You are only changing what the Bulkrax app is looking for in importing. Um, so these are the fields, and this will be by default configured to, and this is across all work types. So this is going to have, by default, you have generic work, image, OER, and ETD work types in out-of-the-box Hyku. So this is going to have fields from across those. Some of those are shared, some of those are unique to a work type. And it will also have some that you do not recognize from your editor page, and that's because it has generated fields as well. And so if you go in here and search for generated, it's going to tell you which of these are considered generated. And so those are generated by the system when it's uploaded, and that is an option when you export. You can choose whether or not to export those generated fields or only the I don't know what I would think of as human editable metadata fields. The primary function of this for most repository administrators is going to be you want to configure probably some additional functionality for how your CSVs are processed. So for example, the way that any of these works, right? This is the entire entry for the metadata field accessibility feature. The from, right? So you have this opening bracket is telling you this is all data related to this field, right? So this field, then a colon, and then the bracket. And so this is two different states or truth values about how this field is treated in your Bulkrax import. So you would have accessibility feature as the metadata field. And by default, that matches exactly what this from attribute is describing. But if you wanted to, you could add a second or third or fourth. You could add additional options for how the column is labeled in your import here. So just for example, I'm going to pull this example from Hyku Commons. By default, we set this up before this function existed. So we actually had to have the developers do this, but now we could do it ourselves. We are agnostic on whether you use a space or an underscore in your column headings. So in your CSV, the column heading, you can use either of these spellings, but they are case sensitive. So if I wanted to, and I wanted to allow my users to capitalize this or not, I could add a third from here. So I would separate that by a comma. And I would do capital, title style capitalization. Just like that. And then I would do another one with this one capitalized and so on. So you can add additional options for account headings. Now I don't actually want to do that, and I'm not going to save these changes. But just to show that that's I think a fairly typical kind of use case. You want it to be agnostic about whether you have an underscore or not. And I should mention that at least in my testing, Firefox does not display underscores in this editor. That might be a setting in how I have my Firefox configured, right? Maybe I have a theme that is playing trouble with that. But so that's a possibility that you might run into. I'm going to try to collect more data on that. And if it is a general thing with Firefox, put in a PR to try to get that fixed. But that's a thing I've noticed. But so this is one state that you can have, which is what label you have on your column will map to this metadata field that exists. And then the second one after from, what did I do? Oh, it doesn't let me Control Z. So I'll refresh so that my changes are not saved there. The second one is what it splits on. And what it splits on is going to follow these two backslashes. And so if we wanted, by default, I think that I think this is out of the box default for Hyku, is that every field is set to split only on this pipe character. A lot of people who are experienced working with CSV and the name of CSV, comma separated values, would lead you to think that commas are the default separator, and that used to be true more often. But for a lot of metadata fields, you're going to have commas, right, in a description. And so we isolated this to only split on pipe. But if you wanted to add splits on pipe and semicolon, um, then you could do that here. And I'm not sure as I'm doing this whether that, I believe that would split, you would do it just like this, split colon slash slash semicolon end quote, just like that. And it has the confirmation on the editor that shows with, in red, which ones are being registered versus which ones are actually separating elements in your editor. So that looks correct to me. I'll double check to make sure that's right. But that's the two most basic use cases. There are also some things in here that I would just recommend not uh, trying to make changes to. Generated, I believe that generated only changes, it doesn't change the behavior of your system. It changes whether Bulkrax considers this a generated field for the purposes of when you select, when you're exporting to export generated fields or not to export generated fields, whether it is included. But I'm fairly sure that when if you change this to false, that it will not stop the importer from generating that information. I believe that this only sort of categorizes this for the purposes of Bulkrax Bulkrax actions. Um, I believe that to be the case. Um, but so that's the real basics of working in here, and the two primary use cases of adding additional softer requirements or more additional options for column headings, and adding additional items to split multiple metadata values if you want to do that. Another reason that you would want to use this is once we are using flexible metadata, which will be a separate module, and I can show that here. We have this in staging at the moment. Same thing, go to your dashboard here, and you have under metadata profiles, this is where your edits to your metadata profiles exists, completely separate from your Bulkrax mappings. But through flexible metadata, you will have the ability to add new metadata fields to work types. Once you do that, you will then have to manually go into your accounts settings and add that field here if you want to then import that through Bulkrax, right? Updating your metadata fields in your system. This is updating the Hyku work types that exist in your repository. Doing that does not automatically update Bulkrax. So you will then have to separately go and update Bulkrax in order to bring in metadata in the newly created fields, right? If you're doing if you create a bespoke metadata field that only applies in a kind of a niche situation, and then your imports don't actually touch that metadata field, right? Then no changes are required. But if you want to import metadata values to newly created metadata fields, then you'll have to first update your YAML file, import the new metadata schema, and then go into settings accounts and add that with this minimal what it will map from and what it will split on in order for Bulkrax to then be updated to the new metadata schema. So that's how those will work interoperably, at least for the time being. There's the possibility of some future automation between the two in future development, but for 6.1 and 6.2, that is the game plan. So I will open it to any questions. If questions get much more technical than what I just walked through, I may not be able to answer them, but
I have a quick question. Once say you make changes to your mappings, is there a way to, and you decide, oops, not what I wanted. Is there a backing out to go to the last good set of mappings at this
there,
point?
there is not.
Okay.
Right, this is just a static, when you save it, it will reflect your new settings. So this is something where I would give repository administrators a bit of guidance and say, if you make changes that you need to abandon, contact your super admin, because they will be able to at least restore it to a default, but not necessarily restore it to any specific past, any specific past state that was working well. So a little bit dangerous in that way.
Well, and as you normally would, you would obviously before you start playing with it, you would take a copy of it and put it someplace so that you have that.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, we almost didn't put a like line number text editor here. We almost made it just a regular text box to encourage you to take it somewhere else to edit it. I will tell you personally, I pull it out into a text file, save that, so I get my fancy text editor highlighting for finding where my closing parentheses are supposed to go, because I'm hopeless at that all by myself, and then go from there. But it is a worthwhile thing to consider, Christine, as whether that should be versioned in the future. If
Well, and
nothing else, having an audit trail of who changed it would probably be valuable in the future.
I will say that when I first saw it in 6.1, I assumed it was view only. And when Nick started editing was the first time that I thought, oh my gosh, you can actually edit this. And I just assumed it was view only. And any changes needed to go through a programmer. So that was much more functionality than I expected. Does anybody else have questions?
Hi, Nick. Can I ask a question quickly? Can these changes be made at the tenant level and the global level? So if I've got 10 tenants and I want to apply the changes to all 10 tenants, can I make that single change or do I have to do it 10 times?
If there is a global option, I'm not aware of it. I don't think that there is.
You can set the default at the code level,
Right.
Which would then apply to everything that doesn't have it overridden. There is a philosophical, like broader philosophical thing here. Is right now in Hyku, anything that is globally applied is done at a programmer level, like as a code deployment. And then things can be overridden at the tenant level. I think there is potential for saying, hey, we should really pull all those settings and configurations into the proprietor view and have, global settings be accessible at the application level, just like the tenant settings are. This really hit me hard when we were talking about it for Google Analytics, right? I think that's another place where you've got code-wise, in vars and that kind of thing for the global configuration, and then tenant by tenant override. And this is sort of in that same boat. So it might be something to configure, to move into configuration in the future.
No, thank you.
Other questions or even any thoughts? What do you think about it? Do you think you'll find it useful? maybe more useful when we get flexible metadata.
Yeah, useful and
Maybe.
also required for certain purposes.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah.
Realistically, this goes hand in hand with flexible metadata. If the models are static and programmer change only, then tenant by tenant changes aren't as big of a deal, and can be done today programmatically. But once you throw flexible metadata into the mix, this becomes, I think, mandatory in a hurry.
Yeah.
Though we have already had instances where one tenant is just dead set on using pipes for the separation of items, and one tenant is dead set on using tildes. And so like that does happen.
Catalogers, metadata people.
But yeah, like I said, I think the two primary use cases are the ones I went over, right? You want to have more flexibility on your headings, or yeah, you have particularly opinionated folks in one institution, and so you can configure for that institution more easily.
Sorry if I missed this, but with the talk of flexible metadata, since those properties are dynamic, how would this work? Or the administrator would have to know about their current profile and build the mappings
Yeah.
off that,
That's right.
not just on the fly. Okay.
I mean, you get the if it matches automatic connection, right? So if your CSV says title and your field name is title, then it matches to title.
Right. But like the splits and stuff.
But there is a theoretical moment where the metadata is updated and the Bulkrax mapping is not updated, where some of your importers might be unhappy. This does, so like that is a real concern, but it is a pretty small concern, I think, fundamentally. I'm really interested to see if this is a thing that happens in practice or not.
Yeah, you'd imagine there'd have to be quite a bit of scaling in your workflows before it would become you have someone who their regular workflow is I'm running import after import, and then somebody else goes and updates the metadata without talking to that person. So if you have something that's operating on that scale, then those kinds of changes can become a problem. But I think most of the shops operating Hyku, the kind of manual 1-2 process seems fairly achievable.
Can we, as we're working through this release candidate testing, maybe we can tee up that case and make sure that the error messaging is clear to the user on the field mapping side once the metadata config is changed.
Yeah, when you have a column, labeled with something that is not accepted by Bulkrax, it should be able to tell you that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking designing that error messaging so it's points the user in the potential places to look would be helpful. So
absolutely.
And that user may not have access to the field mappings. So
Very
thinking
true.
about that when you're thinking through that.
Yeah.
Anyway, more
complexity. Good call out. What? This isn't complex.
Not at all. Not at all.
It's just a 1100 line field mapping file in this admin.
Other questions, comments? I think that people will be really excited about it, especially when flexible metadata comes, because the more you can put in the hands of a repository administrator, I think they'll be excited.